My name is Jack Allen, and I will be your moderator today. Joining us is Chip Childers, Vice President of Product Strategy at CumuLogic. Throughout our presentation, we encourage you to submit questions using the questions pane on GoToWebinar. We will answer questions live at the end of the presentation. Please keep in mind that all participants are in listen-only mode. We are recording today's session, and we'll email a link to the recording tomorrow and post links on the CumuLogic website. Let's get started. We'll kick it off today with today's webinar with Chip. Chip, over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Jack. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. Just before we get started, I want to point out that this is going to be an under 30-minute webinar. The idea is to get you the information that you need as quick as you can, and hopefully you'll be in touch with us if you'd like to dig in a little bit deeper and learn more. So today what we're going to be talking about are really different service delivery options that CumuLogic can do for you as a service provider within your environment, and different ways that you can get revenue out of database as a service. So we'll give you a little bit of a primer about the way database as a service operates. Then we'll walk through each one of these 6 options. You'll get a good understanding about how there are actually many more than these 6. And then we'll spend a little bit of time with Q&A afterwards. As Jack said, please, we'd love your questions. Use the pane. Let me know how we can explain things a little bit deeper for you if you'd like. So let's get started. CumuLogic Database as a Service platform at a glance. So CumuLogic offers a software package that can be deployed in lots of different configurations, and we'll walk through a lot of those configurations in a minute. And the software platform allows you to offer database as a service to your users. And when we talk about database as a service, what we actually mean is the provisioning, ongoing management, self-service change and modification to the environments, and then, of course, termination. So it's a full lifecycle automated solution for database clusters. We support 4 different database types today, both MySQL, Percona on the relational database side, and then MongoDB and Couchbase in the NoSQL realm. The software makes it really easy for the end users to deploy anything from a single node instance up to a multi-node cluster, or even something as complex as a MongoDB sharded cluster, which involves at least 4 different types of nodes in the cluster architecture. We've designed the software to operate in a way that's very similar to Amazon RDS. In fact, for MySQL databases or the Percona engine, the experience is nearly equivalent to RDS. But both Mongo and Couchbase are deployed in a way that's similar to how RDS operates, but those, of course, are not relational databases. If you look at the basic architecture of our system, you're really looking at a software platform that foundationally is able to work on any number of different infrastructure options. It could be anything from vCloud, CloudStack, Citrix Cloud Platform, OpenStack, in terms of private cloud infrastructure as a service, or your service provider environment infrastructure as a service. We can also work with some of the larger known public clouds that are out there. And in the middle, you see we have VM pools and bare metal. And I'll talk a little bit more about how each one of these can be integrated into our platform. But the idea is that you have got a lot of choice in the infrastructure that the databases will be deployed on top of. We mentioned the 4 database engines as we kind of move up the stack that we can provision and manage on your users' behalf. And the core to our platform are a set of common abstractions around clustering, sharding, self-healing, monitoring services, security and access control, automated backups, restorations, point-in-time restorations, and then this notion of AWS compatibility, even at the API level. We can allow for an RDS API to be exposed to your end users that might make it easier for them to transition from RDS over to you as a service provider. And then up top, we offer 2 different UIs. One of them is the end user console, and then the second is the administrative system that your operations team would be using as a provider. Our deployment architecture is actually really straightforward. The controller itself, especially for something like a proof of concept, can be deployed as just a virtual appliance that comes all inclusive with the CumuLogic controller software and an internal MySQL database. Now, of course, once you start offering services as part of your service portfolio, you're going to want to take that same controller and deploy it in more of a multi-node deployment for availability and scaling purposes. That's easily done. Now, the controller will communicate with one or more target infrastructure-as-a-service clouds. Although this can also be a pool of pre-provisioned systems, bare metal servers, or virtual machines. Now, an important thing to note is that CumuLogic is not actually in the data path. What we mean by that is that when an application is communicating with a database cluster that our software is managing on the user's behalf, that communication does not go through any CumuLogic software. The reason for that is that we don't want to actually become a scaling issue for your end users. Instead, the users should think of us as the back-end management, automation, and control plane that's going to allow them to scale those clusters up, get them provisioned quickly, manage their life cycle, but they communicate with that database in the same way that they would if they had manually installed it themselves. Our controller is actually capable of communicating with up to 20 different target clouds. These target clouds, again, they could be of many different types, and each single controller can manage up to 1,000 virtual machines. We've been testing this against nodes being deployed within EC2. We've tested it with nodes deployed in other public cloud providers, and a very small management server is really able to scale quite a bit. So you can see how you could create larger management servers and get even more virtual machines, or you could scale horizontally with our controller in order to get up into many thousands of deployed virtual machines running these database systems. So the purpose of the discussion today, and this will be a little bit technical because we'll be talking about the various deployment options that you've got, and each one of these has a different revenue implication. We'll talk about how you deploy a controller as part of an integrated experience that's integrated with your infrastructure as a service offering. You could think about us as a add-on capability that could be bolted on to single-tenant private clouds that you might be creating and managing for your customers. We can also enable some pretty novel situations where you might just choose to deliver database as a service on another provider's infrastructure. And so you could, for example, take advantage of someone else's capital and yet deliver these valuable services to your customers. And then there's a few more interesting situations where you've got the notion of deploying our controller as a single tenant appliance, maybe based on your service catalog of add-on virtual machines that can be deployed by the customer. That gives the customer full control. We can work with bare metal pools for perhaps high-performance database services that you could sell at a premium. And last, because we can really integrate with multiple back-end infrastructures, you can create these hybrid situations where you might be offering any number of the of the 5 options from before. So let's dig in. Let's look at each one of these in succession. Starting with the integrated experience, this is perhaps the most common situation that we'll run into when we're talking with service providers. The intent here is that you have a multi-tenant infrastructure as a service environment today. Largely, perhaps you're focused on virtual machine services. You may have an object store available as well, and you're looking to add DBaaS into the portfolio of capabilities. So the way this would work is that you would take your controller, you'd integrate, you take our controller, you deploy it in the same location as you have the infrastructure as a service controller deployed. You tie those two together through some identity synchronization between the two systems. And then our controller is able to work with not just the infrastructure as a service stack when it needs virtual resources for a tenant, but then it actually communicates directly with those virtual resources to create the databases the tenant has asked for. Now, one of the trickier bits here is really the question of how do you want to integrate the end user experience, the user interface experience. Do you want that interface to be perhaps a web portal that you've created on your own, where you're surfacing exactly the capabilities you want from the 2 underlying subsystems, the IaaS stack and CumuLogic? That's absolutely a possibility. We're working with some service providers to do exactly this. to writing to our APIs. And we've got a full, every function that we support is supported via a RESTful API on the back end. And so you can really create an experience that's unique to you using us as a building block component. Another option, though, is that you could really create kind of a lightweight integration and use single sign-on functionality to go from whatever user interface your users log into initially, map them over to the CumuLogic controller. We can white label the controller's UI for you to brand it to make it look like your service. So this is the most common scenario. It should be the obvious scenario. Now, the second option is single-tenant private cloud. And there are a number of providers out there that are offering private cloud as a service, whether that's something that's built in a custom way for each customer, or whether it's something that you have really as a fully automated solution where the customer says, I want a 20 server private cloud, and an hour later they've got it. CumuLogic really could play a role in making sure that database as a service functionality is part of that capability. Architecturally, it would be very similar to integration with a multi-tenant environment. Obviously the difference here is that the infrastructure is allocated to a single customer tenant. However, the same type of multi-tenancy that you get in a shared public cloud environment would then be offered to the end users of the private cloud service. So you can imagine the scenario really playing out in much the same ways that it would with the public cloud side, but you could have CumuLogic controllers being deployed with each private cloud that you create for your customers. Now, the third option is one that really, it's come up a couple of times with some providers that we're working with, and they found this to be really interesting. Now, particularly when we get to hybrid scenarios, but there is an option where you as a service provider can take our software, point it at a public cloud of choice that isn't yours, white label the UI, and begin to sell database as a service directly to your users, leveraging someone else's capital, someone else's data centers. You basically are offering RDS or NoSQL as a service very quickly with very low capital cost on your end. Next up, we've got the single-tenant database as a service appliance within a service catalog. And this one's interesting because sometimes as a service provider, what you might choose to be doing with add-on capabilities or software bundles that you want to resell to your users, you may choose to say, listen, we don't want to be in the business of creating database as a service as a capability internally. What we want to be able to do, though, is to let our users get access to a database as a service system that they'll be able to deploy through a single click via the service catalog. The CumuLogic appliance comes as a virtual appliance. If you'd like it to, it could easily be added to that catalog. The customer would then say, yes, give me a CumuLogic controller. They'd have administrative access to it, but it could be pre-configured to point to your infrastructure as a service environment, which means that then the controller lives in that environment, but they're also provisioning databases. That's driving additional and hopefully increased infrastructure revenue for you. So as they create new databases, new virtual machines are being created, new storage is being consumed, and you should see an uptick in the overall infrastructure as a service revenue by adding this type of functionality. It's not just about a single virtual machine being deployed. Next, let's talk about bare metal. Now, this comes up very frequently when you're talking about database services. Oftentimes, you'll be dealing with some customers, and that this will depend on your customer type, but some customers really believe that those databases should be on bare metal. They might have a very valid technical reason for it. It might just be a comfort level reason. In this situation, CumuLogic really can still help you. You can create that as a service capability, but target a pool of bare metal systems that are dedicated to acting as nodes for any of the end user database requests that come through. So the way our controller does that is that you would provision a very simple CentOS-based operating system onto each server. Let's say you roll a rack in, it's filled with servers, you pixie boot everything into a CentOS installation, make sure everything's on the network, and then you give our controller network-based access into all of the servers in the rack. Now, each server becomes an allocatable unit of capacity for our controller. And so if someone said, I'd like to have a 3-node Percona-as-a-Service cluster, our controller would look at the pool and say, here are 3 physical servers that are unallocated. It would then inject the appropriate software into that server, start the database services up, and begin the process of managing it on the user's behalf. And they'd very, very quickly have access to 3 physical nodes operating as members of a Percona cluster. Now, the last scenario that we'll talk about is really this notion that you could do hybrid situations where you've got public plus private. What we've got diagrammed here is an example where perhaps you have a multi-tenant public infrastructure as a service environment. You might also be offering dedicated private cloud environments to your end users. It's easy for you to use our controller to give the end customer the ability to choose whether they're going to deploy any particular database instance to your multi-tenant environment or to a private cloud that they might have. A use case for this could be that private cloud is going to be used for all of the production versions of the applications, but all their developers are going to use your shared multi-tenant environment. You might offer different SLAs between the 2 services, which would be another reason for the end user to have a choice there. But really, it becomes very, very simple. In our user interface, selecting one infrastructure target versus another is a simple drop-down for the end user. And you, as the administrator, have the ability to add whichever target environment you'd like to add to our console, and then even assign permissions for which tenants are going to have access to a particular infrastructure target or not. And that's how you would do this kind of potentially multi-private cloud, single multi-tenant public cloud scenario. But before we leave this slide, though, I want to make the point that each one of the situations that I talked about, the bare metal pools, the external public cloud target, they could also be added to the same controller environment. And so you can mix and match any one of these infrastructure options or any number of these infrastructure options to create whatever combination of infrastructure choices are right for your customer base, yet deliver a consistent, easy-to-use, fully managed database as a service offering. So just to summarize, let's go back to our quick list here. You can get again, let's take a look at what options we have on the back end for those target clouds. It could be vCloud, CloudStack, Citrix Cloud Platform. Multiple OpenStack distributions are supported. Again, VM pools or bare metal pools are easily integrated into the controller. And then if you have if you want to resell infrastructure services from another public provider that supports really any of the APIs that those software systems support, or we know that we work with Amazon, Rackspace, HP Cloud. There's a lot of choice in infrastructure for you. It gives you a lot of flexibility for the way that you deal with your unique customer base, the way that you solve whatever the solution architecture needs to look like for perhaps a complex, larger customer of yours. You've got a lot of combinations that are possible here. Today we have 4 databases: MySQL, Percona, Mongo, and Couchbase. We've got more coming in the future. It's a very pluggable architecture. We're partnering with database companies right now to bring their technologies into the platform. And again, on that user interface level, you've got some flexibility, whether you want to use our APIs to write your own UI, or whether you'd like to do some type of single sign-on functionality with us. We can fit right into whatever your service delivery architecture looks like. So with that, I want to say thank you very much. I know that was a very quick rundown of some options, so we're going to open it up to some questions. But most importantly, we'd love to hear from you, so please feel free to get in touch with us. We've got a sandbox environment available if you'd like to take a quick spin of the software, experience it as a user. That's easy to do. Or if you'd like a more in-depth review of the technology and some of our capabilities, we're happy to talk to you. Get in touch via email at info@CumuLogic.com. So Jack, do we have any questions from the audience?
We do, Chip. Thank you very much. Participants, thank you for submitting the questions that you've submitted. And if you have a question, please feel free to submit it in the questions pane. Chip, we do have some questions. I know you reviewed this in the summary, but again, can you review what databases CumuLogic supports today and perhaps talk about any future additions that are coming in later releases?
Yeah, happy to. So I did just hit them earlier, so it's going to be today MySQL, Percona Extra DB with Galera clustering on the relational database side, and then we also support Couchbase and MongoDB for the NoSQL side of things. On a roadmap, we actually have Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle, Postgres, MariaDB, all of those on the relational database side. We're working to bring those technologies into the common framework. And then on the NoSQL side, we've been looking at both Redis and Cassandra.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chip. Another question that just was asked, what single sign-on protocols are supported with your user interface?
Yeah, good question. So really, we today out of the box have the capabilities to support SAML 2, and we can also do CAS-based single sign-on, that's CAS. Now that said, lots of service providers have different environments. You might have different technologies in place. We're very happy to work with you to make sure that the controller gets integrated in the way that it would make sense for your environment. So if you don't necessarily have SAML or CAS-based single sign-on, you might have something else like OAuth. We're happy to work with you. We can easily integrate it. Again, we've got a very pluggable architecture, and how we do identity synchronization and how we do single sign-on is part of that pluggability.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chip. And it looks like the last question that's been submitted. And again, I encourage you to, participants, I encourage you, if you have any additional questions, please submit them. We will be wrapping up questions after this one if we have no more. How would I meter database usage?
Oh, that's another great integration question. We get this a lot. Really, there are two. It's going to depend on the architecture that you've selected. However, there are two general patterns for metering usage here. The first pattern is that you actually meter at the infrastructure level. And you do that by identifying the virtual machines and the source template that they came from. All of the CumuLogic deployed database nodes are going to come from the same master template within a particular target cloud. That's because you'll pre-create a CentOS-based template with a couple of configuration choices that need to be made in that template so that it's ready to go at runtime when it's being employed to create virtual infrastructure for some new database environment. So normally you'll already have chargebacks sorted out, or you will already have the usage metering and the billing process figured out for the infrastructure layer. And you can just simply add a rule that says if the machine is coming from the source template, you're going to charge an uplift price over top and very, very easily get to the point of revenue. Now, if you don't necessarily have that in place, or if the architecture requires this, our software has all of the usage data that you'd need to charge the customers appropriately stored in its database. We work with providers to make sure that we can take that data and feed it into whatever billing system you might be using.
Wonderful, Chip. Thank you very much. I'm just going through the question pane to make sure that we've got all the questions answered, and I believe we do. So we are wrapping up the question section. So thanks, everyone, for joining us today. As a reminder, you'll receive an email with the link of today's presentation within 24 hours. As Chip mentioned, also, we'd love to have you connect with us and keep the conversation going beyond today's event. So feel free to reach out to us anytime via email at info@cumulogic.com. On behalf of our presenter, Chip, and myself, and everyone at CumuLogic, we hope you have a great day or evening, depending upon where you are in the world. Thank you so much for your time and interest in CumuLogic. Goodbye.